All right, today we are jumping into one of the most intense and frankly chaotic periods of the entire 20th century. We're talking about China's Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, a decade that literally shook a nation to its absolute core. So, the big question is, how on earth did this happen? We're going to unpack the story of how one man, Mao Zedong, after a few major political stumbles, managed to light a match that set his own country ablaze for 10 solid years, all in a ruthless bid to get back on top. So let's set the scene. It's the mid-1960s. Chairman Mao Zedong has kind of been pushed to the sidelines after his last big plan, the Great Leap Forward, turned into an absolute disaster, causing a massive famine. But Mao wasn't the kind of guy to just sit back and retire. Oh no, he was plotting a major comeback. And Mao's big comeback idea? He called it permanent revolution. He started talking about these hidden enemies, these capitalists and traitors, who he claimed were hiding right inside the Communist Party itself. And his solution was that to save the revolution, society needed a complete and violent reset. Now this right here, this was his weapon of choice, the quotations from Chairman Mao, which everyone just called the Little Red Book. It was small enough for anyone to carry around, and with over 1 billion copies printed, 1 billion, it meant his ideology was everywhere. It was easy to read, impossible to avoid, and for a whole lot of people, it became mandatory. So what was the goal? It was simple and brutal. Smash the four olds. Mao basically gave the youth of China a mission. Go out and destroy everything that connects you to the past. We're talking old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas. He wanted to tear down thousands of years of Chinese history to build his new world on the rubble. And you know what? Mao's call was answered. It was answered with a kind of fervent religious zeal that quickly turned into something terrifyingly violent. A whole new force was about to be unleashed on China. Young students, mostly teenagers, started organizing themselves into these groups called the Red Guards. They waved their little red books and acted as Mao's personal army. First, they went after their own teachers and professors, and the violence just exploded with incredible speed. By the end of 1966, Mao himself was actually calling for an all-out civil war. But here's the most twisted part. This wasn't just the government cracking down. The Cultural Revolution made citizens turn on each other. They had these horrifying public rituals called struggle sessions, where people were forced to accuse, humiliate, and even physically attack their own friends, their neighbors, sometimes even their own parents. The human cost was just staggering. Once the army got involved to support the purges, things got even bloodier. Just look at the estimates for 1 year, 1967 alone. 250,000 people killed and another 750,000 left permanently disabled. That's 1 million people in a single year. And the terror didn't spare anyone. An estimated 30 million people were dragged through these struggle sessions, and that includes people at the very top. Take Deng Xiaoping, a powerful party official. He was kicked out of his job and sent to work in a tractor factory. His own son was tormented by Red Guards until he was thrown from a window, which left him paralyzed for life. Absolutely no one was safe. So after years of this chaos boiling up from the bottom, the situation at the very top of the Communist Party was about to become just as unstable. A series of deaths of China's most powerful leaders was about to create a massive leadership crisis. First, in 1971, Mao's own hand-picked successor, Lin Biao, dies in this really mysterious plane crash. The official story is he was trying to flee the country after a failed coup against Mao. Then, in 1976, China gets hit with a double whammy. The widely respected premier Zhou Enlai dies, and just a few months later, Mao himself is gone. The country was in shock, and suddenly there was nobody in charge. In that power vacuum, the Communist Party basically split right in two. On one side, you had the Gang of Four, led by Mao's widow, Jiang Qing. They were the hardliners, the radicals, who wanted to keep the Cultural Revolution going forever. And on the other side, you had the modernizers, the pragmatists, who were desperate to stop the chaos and start rebuilding the country. Well, out of the ashes of this revolution, a new leader and a totally new direction for China were about to rise up, one that would create the foundations of the country we see today. Less than a month after Mao died, his successor, a guy named Hua Guofeng, made his move. He had the Gang of Four arrested. They were put on this big, televised show trial and were publicly blamed for every terrible thing that happened over the last decade. It was actually a pretty clever political move because it let Mao's own image as the great leader stay more or less clean. And that move opened the door for Deng Xiaoping, the same guy who was purged not just once but twice, to come back and eventually become China's new paramount leader. And he immediately took the country in a totally different direction, away from ideology, and towards something he called the four modernizations. It was all about practical results. And just look at the scale of the mess Deng had to clean up. The country was an economic disaster. 80% of the people were peasants, making, on average, $40 a year. The universities had been shut down for 10 years. The country's infrastructure was literally falling apart. This quote from one of Mao's old comrades, Chen Yun, I think just says it all. It perfectly captures this really complex and tragic legacy. The idea is that if Mao had died before starting all this, he'd be remembered very differently. But that last decade, it just overshadowed everything. So the Cultural Revolution left these deep, deep scars on generations of Chinese people. And you really can't understand China today without understanding this decade of trauma. And if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's a pretty sobering one. It shows you the terrifying, almost unbelievable power of a single ideology to completely reshape and even shatter an entire civilization.